My name is Anna Thompson, and I never imagined my life would come to this. Caught between a marriage that feels like a hollow shell and a past that keeps knocking on my door. The cracks in the facade are showing, and it's becoming harder to ignore them. I remember the day the cracks in my carefully constructed life first became glaringly visible. It was a drizzly Tuesday afternoon, and I had taken refuge from the rain in a little cafe in Brooklyn that I once frequented years ago, back when I was just Anna, not Anna Thompson, wife, mother, and part-time freelancer who always had spit up on her sweater and an endless to-do list. The place was called Café Lumière, with fogged-up windows and a glowing neon sign that flickered in and out through the haze. My hair was damp from the sudden downpour, droplets of water sliding down my jacket sleeves as I hurried inside. The brass bell above the door jingling in greeting. I had been trying to outrun the rain, but part of me knew I was also trying to outrun my thoughts. Those nagging, persistent doubts that told me something was awfully wrong with my marriage, with my sense of self, and with the path I had chosen. Inside, the cafe was warm and inviting, with the familiar hum of espresso machines, soft chatter, and the comforting scent of freshly baked croissants. The place had a timeless sort of charm, like it existed outside of New York's normal frantic pace. Pale yellow walls, mismatched wooden chairs, and small round tables made for an eclectic but cozy atmosphere. As I stepped in, a wave of nostalgia hit me, remembering all the times I had sat here brainstorming ad campaigns with the bright-eyed optimism I now seemed to have lost. My reflection in the foggy window reminded me that several years and an entire life stage had passed since I last felt that spark. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket, snapping me out of my reverie. I fumbled to pull it out, knowing exactly whose name would appear on the screen. Sure enough, it was James, my husband, calling me again. I felt the usual twist of anxiety in my stomach. We had been at odds for weeks, months really. Our once loving relationship had devolved into a schedule of quick pecks on the cheek, hurried dinners, if he even bothered to come home for them, and constant friction. Lately, his calls weren't so much to hear my voice or check on me, but to recite some new scheduling conflict or deliver a curt question about the grocery list. I couldn't bring myself to answer this call. The last thing I wanted to hear was another excuse about working late or a complaint about the rising cost of daycare. I tapped the ignore button, feeling both guilt and a strange relief wash over me. My latte was going lukewarm by the time I finally claimed a table near the window. The rain was still falling, droplets racing down the glass in crooked patterns, reflecting the warm lights inside the cafe. There was a quiet hum of conversation, and the barista was calling out an order for someone named Max. I stirred my latte without drinking it, spinning patterns of cream on the surface. My mind wandered to the text messages James had left unread, the short, insincere apologies that had piled up over weeks. Sorry, stuck at the office. Don't wait up, or I'll make it up to you. But he never did. Over time, I had grown numb, resigned even to the distance between us. It had started small, him focusing on his job, me focusing on Lily and the million tasks that came with being a mother. But it had expanded like a slow-growing crack in a window pane, spreading until one day I woke up and realized we were living nearly separate lives under the same roof. I was lost in these somber thoughts when I heard a laugh, a warm, unmistakable laugh that immediately pulled me back to a different era of my life. Across the room, standing at the counter, was Mark Russo. I almost didn't believe my eyes at first. He looked so much like the Mark I had known years before. Tall, a confident stance, hair carefully combed back, and that trademark charcoal suit he always seemed to favor. Only a few subtle lines at the corners of his eyes betrayed the passing years. For a split second, I felt a tug of guilt, as though I had been caught doing something I shouldn't, even though I was just sitting here with a latte and an avalanche of regret. Mark spotted me at almost the same moment I noticed him, and he raised a hand in greeting, his grin broadening into something reminiscent of the days we used to work together at the ad agency. He strode over after ordering his drink. A black Americano, I recalled, or at least it used to be. Mark had always teased me about my sweet tooth, and he joked that my coffee was more sugar than caffeine. His footsteps were confident on the hardwood floors, and I couldn't help but notice how time had refined him, added an air of maturity that was oddly appealing. I felt a dull flush creep up my cheeks, as if a part of me had regressed to the shy delight I felt when we first met. But I also recalled the near disaster of that one Christmas party at the office, where laughter, alcohol, and an almost kiss had redefined the boundaries of our friendship. Boundaries that neither of us openly discussed afterward. "Anna Thompson," he said, sliding into the chair across from me with that same easy charm he'd always had. I almost didn't recognize you without a PowerPoint deck and a swirl of deadlines. He placed his coffee on the table and gave me a once-over. One eyebrow lifting in amusement, I managed a small laugh. "Well, life's a different kind of pitch deck now," I replied, gesturing vaguely at the baby monitor app on my phone screen. Even though Lily was home with the sitter, I always kept the app open out of habit, always attuned to the possibility that motherhood might call me away at any moment. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, how life had been, where we were working, how the ad industry had changed. He told me he was at a new firm now, apparently doing quite well for himself. His cologne, a rich sandalwood scent, drifted across the table in a gentle wave. It triggered a flood of memories. Late nights in the office, spent frantically perfecting campaigns, the adrenaline of working under tight deadlines, the laughter we shared over creative pitches. And yes, the quiet moments when we'd sit together, brainstorming or simply unwinding, and something deeper would hover unspoken between us. We never gave it a name. We never even openly acknowledged it. But it was undeniably there. A spark, a tension, a sense that if our lives had been aligned differently, maybe we would have pursued something beyond friendship. "Ad agency days," he said, shaking his head with a bittersweet smile. "Feels like a lifetime ago. You still keep in touch with anyone from the old team?" I shrugged. "Not really. I kept a few LinkedIn connections, but once Lily came along, everything shifted. I freelance a bit now, just enough to keep my toe in the water, but definitely nothing like the old hustle. He nodded sympathetically. I can imagine. Kids change everything, right? I swallowed the lump in my throat. They do. In my mind, I was thinking not just about Lily, but about how her arrival had also changed the dynamic between James and me. We had once been a team, or so I believed, ready to conquer the world. But somewhere between the diapers, the nights of no sleep, the stress of providing, we lost our common language. Now, we rarely spoke about anything deeper than bills and chores. Mark's gaze flickered to my wedding band, still snug on my finger, and I wondered if he could sense the tension in me. Then his eyes returned to mine, and for a moment, we were both silent. I sensed the question unspoken. Are you happy? I braced myself for it, half expecting him to ask directly. But he didn't. Instead, he sipped his coffee and started reminiscing about the time we pitched a cutting-edge sneaker campaign at 2 a.m, fueled by caffeine and ambition. I laughed, genuinely laughed, at the memory of the client's stone-faced reaction until we showed them the data that proved our crazy idea would work. That sense of validation and creativity had felt so exhilarating back then. I realized how much I missed that high. Time seemed to slip away as we talked. The rain outside persisted, painting the windows in a shifting mosaic of droplets. My phone buzzed a few more times, and each time I glanced at the screen, I saw James's name. I felt Mark's eyes flick toward it, but he didn't pry. Eventually, the phone call stopped, and a few texts from James appeared instead. More apologies, more superficial attempts at explaining why he would be late or unreachable. My chest tightened with each vibration, and I finally set the phone on silent mode, face down on the table. Mark noticed my obvious frustration and gently ventured, "Everything okay at home?" I forced a smile, but it felt tight on my face. "Fine," I lied. Or maybe I wasn't lying exactly. Maybe I was just refusing to open up that wound in front of someone who once threatened the equilibrium of my life in a way I wasn't prepared to admit. My marriage troubles, after all, weren't Mark's business. And yet, there was a part of me that wanted to spill everything, to unload the weight that was suffocating me day by day. He nodded, though I could tell he wasn't convinced. We fell into a moment of silence, where I picked at the sleeve of my jacket, and he traced a pattern on his coffee cup. Then I asked him about his life, his relationships, his new job, his reasons for being in this particular cafe on a rainy day. I learned that he was now a creative director, traveling a lot, single by choice, or so he claimed. He made a quip about how he'd rather be married to his career than go through a messy divorce, referencing some mutual acquaintances who had parted ways. I chuckled, but it came out hollow. Marriage seemed like a far-off fantasy to him. And to me, it was a reality that felt as though it was unraveling one thread at a time. Eventually, I realized we'd been sitting there a while. Lily's sitter had a set schedule, and I couldn't linger forever. I told him I should probably go, gesturing to my phone with a small sigh. Mark stood as well, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he offered to walk me out, at least to help me avoid the worst of the rain. Outside, the drizzle had intensified to a steady shower, and I shivered slightly beneath my coat. My latte sat half-finished on the table behind me, cold and forgotten. Much like many aspects of my life, I felt was slipping away. We stepped out under the canopy of the cafe's entrance, where a string of fairy lights glowed like fireflies in the grey afternoon. Mark turned to me, an umbrella in hand. "Let me walk you to your car or the subway, whichever you need," he offered. I hesitated, not because of the practicality of his offer. Of course, it would be better to have an umbrella buddy in this weather, but because of what being alone with Mark stirred in me. It was a reminder of that almost kiss we shared so many years ago, the one that nearly crossed a line. Back then, I was still engaged to James, filled with dreams of building a life with him. Mark had a girlfriend at the time, though it never seemed that serious. Our flirtation had been fueled by late nights, mutual admiration, and a strong emotional chemistry we never defined. In a moment of tipsy closeness at the Christmas party, we found ourselves under the mistletoe, laughter turning to a charged silence. Our lips came so close they almost touched, the world around us slowing to a hush. Then, someone in the hallway called out to us, snapping us both back to reality. We pretended it was all a joke, just a silly moment. We never spoke of it again, but the memory clung to me, recurring at odd times. I finally nodded, and he lifted the umbrella. As we walked, we reminisced more about the past. I was surprised at how natural it felt to talk to him. There was no awkwardness, only a gentle sense of what might have been. The stormy sky above seemed to mirror my internal state, turbulent, uncertain, and pregnant with possibilities that both intrigued and frightened me. When we reached the corner where I had parked my car, a battered old sedan that James and I shared, Mark paused. The sidewalk was nearly empty, with most people having fled indoors to avoid the bad weather. The city around us was muted in the rainy twilight, the tall buildings looming like silent spectators. Mark lowered the umbrella just enough so the rain wasn't hitting our faces, and we stood there, huddled together. I could see the reflection of wet pavement glistening behind him, and the faint red glow of a traffic light in the distance. He looked at me in a way that made me catch my breath. "I've missed talking to you," he said simply. I felt something break inside me, some thin barrier I had tried to keep in place that separated me from acknowledging my loneliness. In Mark's gaze, I sensed an acknowledgement of the tension between us, a thread that hadn't quite snapped after all these years. I swallowed hard. I thought of Lily, of James, of the vows I took. My ring felt heavy on my finger, as if it were made of lead rather than gold. "I've missed talking to you too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He let out a slow breath, and for a second, I wondered if he was going to say something more direct, like how he had regretted not kissing me that night, or how he sometimes thought about me. but he didn't. He simply reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair away from my face, tucking it gently behind my ear, a gesture so intimate it made my heart flutter. The warmth of his hand lingered on my cheek, even after he pulled away. Just then, my phone vibrated once more. I glanced at the screen, and sure enough, it was James calling again. A surge of annoyance and guilt shot through me. I remembered the vow I made to myself earlier that day, to at least pick up one of his calls, try to talk things through, try to be a better wife than I had been lately. But in this moment, I couldn't bear the thought of hearing his voice. I silenced the phone again, turning the screen downward. Mark gave me a small, sad smile, like he understood all too well what was happening without needing any explanation. "You look tired," he said softly. "Really tired." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of my responsibilities pressing on my shoulders. Work deadlines, Lily's schedule, James's constant absences and half-hearted apologies. I opened them to find Mark studying me with a mix of concern and something else. Something that made me recall the time we nearly stepped over that line at the Christmas party. "Anna," he began, his voice low. "I know it's none of my business, but if you ever need a friend to talk to, you know I'm here, right?" His offer was sincere, but also fraught with danger. I wasn't naive. I recognized that spark between us. Accepting his friendship would be playing with fire, especially given how fragile I felt. But it also felt so good to be seen by someone, to be recognized, to have a conversation that wasn't about grocery runs or baby formula. So I nodded, giving a non-committal. "Yeah, I appreciate that." We stood there a moment longer, the rain pattering on the umbrella, the city noises muffled. Then I recalled that Lily would be hungry soon, that the sitter was on a schedule, that I couldn't just stand here and let my fantasies of what-ifs consume me. I mustered a small smile. "I should go. Thank you for the walk." He gave a short nod. "Any time." I slid into my car, turning on the engine. The wipers screeched across the windshield, clearing the watery blur. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced back in the rearview mirror to see Mark standing on the sidewalk, umbrella still raised. I could see his reflection in the wet pavement as he watched me drive off. My chest felt tight, a knot of conflicting emotions swirling inside me. The tension that began stirring back at the cafe didn't dissipate. It merely took root, tangling itself around my thoughts as I made my way home. The drive through Brooklyn streets was slow because of the weather. Red brake lights glowed through the haze, and the rhythmic hiss of the wipers became a sort of hypnotic soundtrack to my racing mind. I passed rows of brownstones, their windows glowing softly in the early dusk. I thought of the families inside, sharing dinner, chatting about their day. My home, in comparison, felt lonely, even though I lived with my husband and daughter. James was never fully present, always either physically at work or mentally preoccupied with it. And I found myself dreading the moment I would step inside and see an empty living room. Or worse, see him there but feel the unbearable tension between us. By the time I reached my house, a modest 2-story attached brick home with a small front stoop. My nerves were frayed. The sitter greeted me at the door with a polite smile. She updated me that Lily had napped well and had been fed. Lily was in the playpen, happily chewing on a soft toy, her brown curls bouncing as she turned toward me with a wide grin. In that instant, my heart swelled with love and shame. Love for this innocent, beautiful child who gave my life meaning, and shame for feeling a spark of attraction to another man, for wanting, even momentarily, an escape from my obligations. I thanked the sitter, paid her, and walked her to the door. When I returned, Lily reached up with her chubby arms and I scooped her up, hugging her tightly. She smelled like baby shampoo and warm milk, pure comfort. She giggled at my damp hair, tugging at the strands. I tried to immerse myself in her laughter, in her sweetness, to forget the cafe, the conversation, the subtle thrill of Mark's presence. But it all lingered in the back of my mind, refusing to fade. As evening approached, I busied myself with dinner preparations. Pasta with a simple sauce, some vegetables I knew Lily could nibble on. I kept checking my phone, half hoping James would text to say he'd be home for dinner, half dreading that he wouldn't. An hour later, I had Lily in her high chair, rummaging her baby spoon around in mashed carrots, while I ate a lukewarm plate of pasta. James never walked through the door. The house was silent, except for Lily's occasional coos and the hum of the refrigerator. I tried not to let it bother me, but there was an ache in my chest that I couldn't ignore. I thought about how, in my wedding vows, I had promised to love James in good times and in bad. I still remembered standing there in my white dress, my heart full of hope, convinced that we were unbreakable. Now, years later, we hardly spoke about anything real. I wasn't sure I knew him anymore, yet I still wore the ring, still called myself his wife, because that was the life we had built, or tried to. After dinner, I gave Lily a bath, her laughter echoing in the bathroom as she splashed water everywhere. That moment of simple joy was like a balm on my frayed nerves. But once she was dried off, in her pajamas, and nestled into her crib, the silence of the house pressed down again. I tiptoed out of her room and checked my phone. There was a single text from James. "Running late. Don't wait up." Another one, almost identical to the countless others. No reason given. No, "I miss you." No, "How's Lily?" Just the same generic message. I stared at the text for a long time, my phone's glow reflecting off the ring on my finger. Then, I felt my mind drifting to Mark, to the conversation we had in the cafe, to the way his hand felt brushing against mine. A flicker of excitement ignited in my stomach, immediately followed by a wave of guilt. I shouldn't be thinking about another man when my marriage was already hanging by a thread, yet I couldn't help it. The memory of his cologne, of his laughter, of the genuine interest he showed when asking about my life. It all felt like a warmth I hadn't experienced in a while. To distract myself, I picked up a church bulletin that my friend Kathy had given me weeks ago. She'd scribbled a verse from Psalm 139 on it. "You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. I ran my fingers over the words, feeling a pang of conscience. If I believed God truly knew me, then he knew how conflicted I felt, how tempted I was by the memory of that almost kiss. He knew the resentment that was festering inside me toward James, the longing for someone, anyone, to see me, hear me, care for me. I closed my eyes and tried to pray, but the words got stuck in my throat. All I managed was a silent, fervent plea. God help me. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Sleep came fitfully that night. I tossed and turned, imagining every possible outcome of the day's events. In one scenario, I pictured myself calling Mark the next day, meeting him somewhere, letting the weight of my loneliness pull me into something I'd regret. In another scenario, I pictured James coming home, us having a tearful conversation, promising to make it work, going back to how things used to be. But neither vision felt entirely real. I wanted so badly to fix my marriage, yet I didn't know if James even cared enough to try. The next morning, the weather had cleared, replaced by a crisp winter sun. I looked out the window, seeing the sheen of rainwater on the streets, glinting in the pale light. Lily woke up early, babbling happily. As I changed her diaper, I felt a sense of determination settle over me. Maybe I could still salvage things with James. Maybe it was time for a serious talk, an ultimatum, or counseling. I resolved to call him later in the day, see if we could carve out some time to talk, really talk about our problems. But as I was packing Lily's things, preparing to drop her off at daycare for a few hours while I tried to catch up on freelance work, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen wasn't James. It was Mark. A short text popped up. Good morning. Thought of you when I passed Café Lumière. Hope you're well. My heart did a tiny somersault. It was an innocent enough message, but I felt that warmth creeping into my chest again. A reminder that there was someone out there who was thinking of me, reaching out to me. I typed a quick reply, too quick. Hey, morning. Thanks for checking in. How are you? I knew it wasn't exactly betrayal to text an old friend, yet, as I hit send, I felt that flicker of guilt again, a reminder that I was on shaky ground. Mark's response came almost immediately. I'm good. Wanted to see if you might be free for coffee again sometime. It was nice catching up yesterday. I bit my lip, glancing over at Lily, who was busy gumming a teething ring. The decision before me felt almost absurd. On one hand, I was starved for genuine conversation and connection. On the other, I was aware of how easily a friendship with Mark could slip into something more. He and I had a history of unresolved tension, after all, and my marriage was already in trouble. Did I really want to invite more complications? Still, I typed back a cautious reply. Maybe. Let me see how my schedule looks. We can keep it casual. I went about my day, trying to focus on my freelance work, designing a small social media campaign for a local bakery. But my thoughts kept drifting. I found myself reliving the moment Mark's hand brushed mine, the way he looked at me under that umbrella. And I imagined the disappointment and anger that would undoubtedly flare in James if he even knew I was texting Mark. But then again, I rationalized. James was barely around. he might not even notice. Afternoon rolled around, and I realized James hadn't texted or called at all. My attempt to reconcile with him seemed pointless if he wasn't going to communicate. I sighed, feeling that familiar mixture of sadness and anger. In my email inbox, I spotted a message from him, forwarded from Lily's daycare, about some upcoming event. That was it. No personal note. No, hey, how are you today? Just a matter-of-fact forward with an FYI in the subject line. It was as if we were business associates rather than spouses. By the time I picked Lily up from daycare and got home, I was emotionally drained. The early winter sunset cast long shadows on the living room walls. I heated up some leftovers for dinner, fed Lily, and kept an eye on my phone, half expecting a message from Mark and half dreading it. There was a hollow ache in my chest that reminded me of how lonely I felt. I knew I should probably try calling James, but the resentment in me was too strong at that moment. Eventually, I decided to give Lily her bath. Early. She splashed around, giggling, while I watched her with a heavy heart. I couldn't let my tension seep into her life. She deserved to feel safe and loved, no matter how messy her parents' relationship was. Once she was settled in for the night, I lingered in the hallway outside her room, feeling lost. I thought about the verse from Psalm 139 again. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? The words haunted me. Was I trying to run from my problems, from my responsibilities, from God? I padded downstairs, my feet sinking into the worn carpet. The living room felt empty. The clock on the wall ticked ominously, marking each second that James was absent. I thought about how we used to cuddle on the couch, watch silly shows, and talk about traveling the world. It all felt like a distant dream now. My eyes settled on a framed photo of our wedding day. The two of us beaming, full of love and promise. I wondered if I was still that woman, or if she had vanished under the weight of motherhood, marital strife, and latent desires for something more. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. My heart jumped, thinking maybe it was James at last. But no, it was Mark again. A short message. Thinking of you. I'll be at the cafe tomorrow, around noon if you want to swing by. I stared at the message, the possibilities unraveling in my mind. I could ignore it, pretend I never saw it. I could message back politely, say I was too busy. Or I could go have a harmless coffee, maybe chat more about old times. But was it really harmless? I recalled the flutter I felt when we talked, how just a simple conversation made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in a long time. I typed and erased several replies before finally settling on one. Not sure I can make it, but thanks for the invite. I stared at my own words, uncertain about how I felt sending them. On one level, I was proud that I hadn't immediately leapt at the chance. On another, a part of me felt disappointment. I craved that sense of recognition, of being understood, that Mark had offered me. Before I could second-guess myself further, I heard the front door open. James stepped inside, looking exhausted and somewhat disheveled. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and he carried his briefcase like it was a ball and chain. He glanced at me, barely meeting my eyes. "Hey," he muttered, dropping his things on a chair. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice even. I felt my pulse quicken. This was our chance, maybe, to reconnect, or at least communicate. "Long day?" I ventured. He gave a heavy sigh, not even bothering to take off his coat. "Yeah, you could say that. I'm beat. I'm just gonna shower and go to bed." My stomach twisted. "Did you eat?" He shook his head, eyes already drifting away from me. "I'll grab something later." Then he walked upstairs without another word. I stood there in the living room, feeling tears prick the corners of my eyes. There was no greeting, no inquiry about Lily, no attempt at conversation. This had become our routine, a silent dance of avoidance. The tears I had been fighting all day threatened to spill over, but I swallowed them back. In a flash of anger, I grabbed the framed wedding photo from the shelf and held it in my hands, looking into the eyes of a version of James who had once seemed brimming with love for me. "I don't know who you are anymore," I whispered to the empty air. Then I gently set the photo face down on the shelf, turned off the living room lights, and headed to our bedroom. He was in the shower when I walked in. I could hear the running water, the steam curling out from under the bathroom door. I changed into my pajamas quickly and slipped into bed, pulling the covers up. My phone was still in my hand, though, and I stared at the message from Mark one more time. "Thinking of you. I'll be at the cafe tomorrow around noon if you want to swing by." I knew I should probably just delete it. Instead, I left it there. A silent temptation. An unspoken possibility. James emerged from the shower and flicked off the bathroom light without a word. He crawled into bed, turning his back to me almost immediately. My heart ached with the weight of everything unsaid. I wanted to shake him, to yell, "Can we talk? Please. Don't you see what's happening to us?" But the words lodged in my throat. And so we fell asleep in tense silence, just inches apart yet feeling miles away. That night, my dreams were plagued by images of rain-soaked streets and endless phone calls that I never answered. I dreamed of standing at the altar again, except James wasn't there. Mark stood in his place, a wry smile on his face. I dreamed of Lily reaching for me, only for me to fade away. I dreamed of Psalm 139, echoing over and over. "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence?" And feeling a deep sense of shame that I was even entertaining the idea of meeting someone else while my marriage was in tatters. When I woke up, the early morning light filtered through the curtains, painting the room in muted grays. James was already gone. I found a note on the kitchen table that said, "Early meeting." Sorry. No explanation, no affection, just another brush-off. That was when I decided. I told myself that if James didn't care to fix what was broken, if he couldn't even make time to discuss our future, then maybe I needed to rediscover who I was. My needs, my desires, my sense of self that had gotten buried under duty and disappointment. I knew meeting Mark for coffee wasn't the most righteous or safest path. but a part of me felt it was better than sitting in this silent, lonely house, waiting for a man who no longer seemed to notice me at all. Heart pounding, I texted Mark. "I'll stop by." "Around noon, right?" He replied almost immediately with a confirmation. My stomach churned with both excitement and dread. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to make a choice that could change everything. I told myself it was just a coffee, just a conversation, nothing more. But deep down, I knew the cracks in the facade of my life were widening. And once you let the light in through those cracks, there's no telling what might break open for good. And yet, in that moment, the possibility of feeling seen, of having someone listen, of reclaiming a piece of my old identity, felt worth the risk. With Lily safely in daycare for a few hours, I could slip away, at least briefly, to recall who I once was, and maybe glimpse who I could still become. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was teetering on the brink of a mistake. But the alternative, doing nothing, drowning in the silent tension at home, seemed just as dangerous. So I took a breath, looked at the verse in Psalm 139 one more time, and silently pleaded for guidance. Even so, I picked up my keys, grabbed my coat, and set out, aware that everything in my life might soon shift in ways I couldn't yet comprehend.